This morning reading is from Psalm 119, 25 to 32, and can be found in the Pew Bible on page 535. My soul clings to the dust. Revive me according to your word. When I told of my ways, you answered me. Teach me your statutes. Make me understand the way of your precepts, and I will meditate on your wondrous works. My soul melts away for sorrow. Strengthen me according to your word. Put false ways far from me, and graciously teach me your law. I have chosen the way of faithfulness. I set your ordinances before me. I cling to your decrees, O Lord. Let me not be put to shame. I run the way of your commandments, for you enlarge my understanding. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks be to God. My soul clings to the dust. That's what the psalmist said. And it really is the strangest of images, isn't it? My soul clings to the dust. When I try to imagine myself reaching my hand into a pile of dust and grabbing hold of it, I imagine the particles of dust falling between my fingers, the way water might fall between our fingers when we try to grasp it. When I think of dust, I think of people sneezing in an effort to get those irritating particles out of their respiratory system. When I think of dust, I think of failure. I paid attention to Dionne Warwick when she asked us if we knew how to find our way to San Jose. Dreams turn to dust and blow away. That's what she's saying. When I think of dust, I think of a closed room, the door shut and never entered. A room where something happened that can neither be faced nor forgotten. A dusty place of unfinished business. When I think of dust, I think of the fragile moments by the graveside. Dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. When I think of Jesus and dust, I think of the gritty dust of the ancient world thrown up into the air by the Roman chariots, settling on his peaceful brow, while he wipes it away and speaks of eternal truths. When I think of Jesus and dust, my mind goes to the 8th chapter of John's Gospel. They brought somebody to Jesus that day, somebody that they wanted to kill, because the law of Moses had been broken. They wanted to inflict the punishment that the law of Moses said they should. And they wanted to know if Jesus would follow the Bible or not. You know the story in the 8th chapter of John's Gospel. A woman caught in the act of adultery is brought to Jesus. And they want to stone her. They want to take her life as the ancient teachings declared. And what does Jesus do? He kneels down. And he starts writing in the dirt. Dirt is dust, isn't it? Now maybe he does it because he just needs a moment to pray, a moment to think about what he should do, to draw close to God, to gain some wisdom. Or maybe he's drawing in that dirt, trying to think through in his own mind both the call to righteousness and the call to compassion. Or maybe he kneels down and clings to the dust in a way of hoping these people who are making these accusations would hear their own rants, would hear their own hatreds. No one can say for sure. And no one knows what was written in that dust that day. Maybe he just doodled. Nothing at all. Now, in the very same sentence where the psalmist says he clings to the dust, the psalmist also asks God for a word that would revive and restore. Revive me according to your word while I'm clinging to dust. Stephen Covey, in his best-selling book entitled 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, shares this story. It's written by a man named Arthur Gordon, and it's called Turn the Tide. Gordon describes a season in his own life when his world seemed stale and flat. His enthusiasm for life has waned, and it's getting worse day by day. A medical doctor found nothing wrong with him physically, but then the doctor offered this help. He said if Gordon would follow his instructions for one day, he just might do better. So the doctor told him that he was to spend the next day in a place where he had been happiest as a child. He was not to talk to anyone. He was not to read or to write. He was not to listen to any music. Then the doctor wrote out 4 prescriptions, and he told them to open them, one at 9 a.m., one at noon, one at 3 p.m., and one at 6 p.m. Well, the next morning, Gordon went to the beach. His first prescription, the doctor's first prescription, said this: listen. Listen carefully. It seemed insane to listen to the waves for 3 hours a day. But he did it. And he noticed through the course of the day that he began to hear more and more sounds. sounds that he hadn't noticed before. He began to think of the lessons he'd learned as a child, lessons from the sea, patience, respect, the wonderful way that all the pieces of nature are connected one with another. Well, at noon, he opened the second prescription from the doctor. And all it said was, try reaching back. To what, he thought. And then he thought of the joyful times of his childhood. And he began to feel a growing warmth within his spirit. Well, the 3 p.m. message threw some cold water on him. It was, examine your motives. At first, he was defensive. Of course, he wanted success, he wanted fame, he wanted security. He could justify all of that in his own mind. But then it occurred to him that these motives were not good enough. And the fact that they were not good enough was making him stagnant. Later, he would write these words. It makes no difference whether you're a mailman, a hairdresser, a housewife, or whatever, as long as you feel like you're serving others, you do the job well. And when you're only concerned with helping yourself, you do it less well. When 6 p.m. came, the final prescription did not take long to fill. Write your worries in the sand, it said. So he knelt and he wrote several words with a broken shell. Then he turned and he walked away. He didn't look back. He knew that the tide would come. And all that he worried about would be cared for. Now I know sand isn't dust. But he clinged to it and let it go. Now Jesus in the 8th chapter of John's Gospel clings to the dust not just once, but he does it twice. I've already described for you how it happened the first time. The crowd has come with the person who'd broken the law, and they're demanding an execution according to the laws of Moses. But while Jesus is clinging to the dust, writing in the sand, he stands up and he looks at the crowd a second time. He looks at the crowd and he says, "Let anyone among you who is without sin cast the first stone." That was the first time he wrote in the dust. And then he took his head, his attention away from the crowd, and returned to writing in the sand. Now maybe Jesus clings to the dust. So this angry mob will have a chance to see themselves as they are. Have an opportunity to pull themselves back from the horrors that they were envisioning. It's interesting here in the 8th chapter of John's Gospel that Jesus doesn't stop the angry crowd. They stop themselves. Jesus doesn't control their behavior, but he awakens the most noble aspects within them, and they control themselves. The power of God displayed in this passage is not the divine power over human beings, but it is the persuasive power. Divine wisdom interacts with human choice. The outcome is good. Jesus pushes back just hard enough for that angry mob to see themselves. It is the word the psalmist longed for, a word that revives. Rowan Williams was the Archbishop of Canterbury. And while he was the Archbishop of Canterbury, he had responsibilities for the worldwide Anglican Communion. And one day he got a phone call, and as he answered the phone, the person began to speak to him in Welsh. Now, he said he understood the Welsh language reasonably well. That is, he could understand every word the caller was speaking. But he knew in his own mind that he couldn't answer the questions in Welsh with the complexity and the sophistication that the question demanded. And so in that moment, he had to make a choice. Do I answer in Welsh or not? Now, Rowan Williams, as he tells the story, never tells us how he resolved that dilemma in that moment. But he did go on to say that we all have a choice, because the world always speaks to us in the language of violence. And if we answer back in violence, we are not speaking the language that is our own. No, Jesus clings to the dust as the angry mob comes. And he gives them an opportunity to see themselves. They make a choice. They stop. Jesus does not answer them with their language, but he clings to the dust until that reviving word of God flows from his Spirit. And the world has never, ever, ever forgotten that conversation. We take our cat with us on vacation. She likes it a whole lot. You see, when we're in Concord, we don't let the cat go out of the house. We're a little worried. But Since our place is on an island and cats aren't overly fond of water, we figure it's pretty safe to let her out. Well, one day I was sitting in the rowboat, and the cat very bravely made her way down onto the dock, and I was sitting in the boat, so I kind of beckoned to her, and she hopped in the rowboat. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So after a few minutes, when she seemed very much at peace and very comfortable, I wondered if she'd like to go for a ride. So I kind of slowly pushed the boat away from the dock. The cat was not amused. Before I could change the error of my ways, the cat looked at the dock and looked at the boat and looked back at the dock and jumped. And she came up about 6 inches shy. She landed right in the water. Her head breaks the surface and she looks around in panic. She notices where the shore is and then she ducks back under the water. She swims underwater as quick as I've ever seen. Ever seen a cat swim? And she gets to the shore and she takes off. We didn't see that cat for a little bit of time. I suspect if you ever Google the word indignant, you'll get a picture of a wet cat with the fur all matted and shaking her paw in absolute disgust. Now, fortunately, cats aren't smart enough to figure out I pushed the boat away from the dock, so she's not holding a grudge. And in a relatively short period of time, that cat did come back, curled up on Kathy's lap, and started to purr. Wet cats always dry out, and broken bones heal. The sting of insults fade. And nothing will ever happen to you or to me that God and God's grace cannot see us through. And if in our moments of sorrow we can lay claim to that rich promise, we will do well. And if our dreams turn to dust, cling even to that dust until the reviving word comes. Amen.